Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Beyond Max Q. I'm your host, Mollie Jahner. I am joined by throwback from the past, Anne Bly, my co-host. She hasn't been on in ages, and I'm so
I know.
excited to have her
It's
here
been
today
forever.
to co-interview our guest, Aaron. He is the CEO of Orbital Robotics, and got a lot of really cool things to talk about today. So we are a hard tech aerospace focused primarily podcast, and so having you on to talk a little bit about what you're building and AI,
Yeah.
everything, talking about how that marries with AI, I think is going to be really exciting. So with that, please, sir, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Great to meet you. I'm Aaron Borger. I'm the CEO of Orbital Robotics, and yeah, glad to talk about it.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great. Well, and we can just kick it right off. So you've been involved in space robotics for how long?
Yeah. So I really started as an undergrad. My school was a great school in the fact that they actually allowed undergrad students to launch payloads to space. So I led a couple of teams doing that, starting with a project where we had two robotic arms that would actually throw and catch objects in space.
Oh,
And so
okay.
we were using AI to control those
So
robotic
time
arms.
out. You had robots playing space football, is what you're telling
Pretty
me?
much, yeah. We had a ball, we had
Okay.
a cube, a wrench. Yeah, it was pretty
That's
cool.
awesome. I've seen the robot dogs like fighting and things like that, but I
Yeah,
haven't seen robots playing football. That's pretty cool.
yeah,
That's awesome. I love that.
yeah. So we had them throwing basically, we had a lot of simulation work that we had to do to get to that point, but also built the arms all custom, mostly because it was a pretty small rocket and we couldn't find any online that we just purchased. So
Okay.
definitely learned a lot building all the hardware, mechanical, electrical, and software from scratch to make it work for that.
Oh, yeah. Well, how long was that process?
This is another crazy part. I went from not knowing how to do any robotics. I hadn't ever touched robotics before, or actually getting AI to work. I'd played with AI before, but hadn't gotten it to work. And went from that point to launching AI controlled robots on a rocket within 1 year.
Whoa. That's super fast.
Yeah.
Very cool. So, what caused you to start your company then?
Yeah, there was a lot of, I would say, studying. I previously worked at Blue Origin, so there was a lot of studying there and figuring out what kind of problems are there in the aerospace world. And I think one of those is how you can apply AI to aerospace because
Mm.
there's a lot of benefit you can get from it, but there's also the safety critical aspect where we are dealing with billion-dollar assets and need to make sure that
Right.
everything works perfectly. And AI is kind of known for not having a great predictability in its behavior.
You don't
So
have hallucinations when you're in space. That would be
exactly,
bad.
exactly, yeah. So I thought about that for a while, and then I actually went off, worked on a PhD for a little bit, and then decided that I think right now is a great time in the market to actually start a company and get focused on putting something into space that actually is going to benefit the world.
Well, what does orbital robotics do? We're kind of like talking around it, but I'd love to like have you give your pitch, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah. So for the most part, we make autonomous space robots. A couple
Okay.
of use cases is going to be RPOD, so rendezvous, proximity operations, and docking, how you can take one spacecraft, dock it with another one. But then at the same time, after you solve that problem, you also need to manipulate components on a spacecraft, which helps for satellite
Hmm.
servicing, refueling, things along those lines, as well as assembling space stations. There's a lot of use cases for once you can actually connect two spacecraft and manipulate objects on orbit. And all of that we're mostly relying on AI to solve because it's too complex for normal software.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Why is it too complex for normal software?
Yeah. The two main reasons is one, dynamic coupling between the robotic arms and the spacecraft. So as you
Okay.
move the robotic arms, your spacecraft's going to move as well. So it can be pretty
Oh,
hard to grab another object while your spacecraft is also moving. So if you just had like a human trying to control the robotic
yeah.
arm, they would say, okay, I want to move my arm forward, but then the spacecraft would move and it would move it somewhere else. And so you almost have to predict what's going to happen and
Mm.
then figure out how to control the robotic arm to account for that.
It's really interesting. So what are the safety concerns around using AI then as it pertains to all of this? Because that feels like it would be, that's something that pops into my mind.
Yeah, yeah. there's already been some progress on that side with autonomous vehicles as well,
Mhm.
and so there's been progress there, but I would almost say autonomous vehicles is easier because they have figured out how to basically predict human behavior. If someone runs across the road, you need to predict that and then account
Mhm.
for that. But all these systems in space pretty much are defined by physics. So, like Newton and Kepler already figured out how the behavior of the spacecraft is going to be, and
Mhm.
so we just use those laws of physics to predict what's going to happen. The difficult part is a lot of the AI methods, and when I say AI, I'm not really talking about Gen AI like LLMs and
Yes.
ChatGPT
Right.
to generate code. For the most part, we handwrite all our code because that allows our engineers to have a full understanding of how it
Oh.
works. But we're talking about just using a neural network, providing some kind of input. Like if I have two spacecraft in orbit, I want to know the position, the
Mm.
speed, things like that in between the two spacecraft. So we provide that as input and then get some kind of control output that says, okay, I want to move the spacecraft this way.
So you're talking
So,
about doing, like, that hardcore math that I see
yeah,
astronauts in movies doing, like, really fast, which is
yep,
great because I feel like that's probably needed.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, okay.
So
So
the
you're
hard
like,
part is
anybody could be an
figuring out
astronaut then.
whether or
Yep.
not the AI is going to actually do what you want it to do.
That's really interesting. Well, and so you said you've been, I mean, you were in school forever. You went back and got your PhD. You started, how long has Orbital
I
Robotics
didn't
been in?
quite get my PhD. I left
Well, you
early.
don't need to admit that. No, no,
Close
no,
enough.
you
Close
you
enough. Yeah.
went and you're getting your PhD. We'll
Yeah,
just leave it.
yeah,
You've got the P, and then the HD's coming. But
yeah,
what, okay, so how long has Orbital Robotics been in business? What does the next, like, 3 years look like for you guys? Because space is so different that, we had talked to a lot of startups, but I feel like the aerospace and space industries, what a startup is so different as it
yeah,
pertains to, like, the AI world, but you're doing both. So
yeah.
what does that mean?
Yeah. So we actually are a fairly new company. We just recently incorporated, and we already have a good amount of customers asking for robotic arms and software. So uh,
Fantastic.
th- we can't entirely talk about all those yet. That
Sure.
more information will come soon. But I will say we have about 4 to 5 robotic arms that will be launched into space within the next 1 to 2 years.
Wow.
We're
Amazing.
also working on some. There's some satellites that are going to be re-entering the atmosphere soon, and those need to be basically captured and
Okay.
boosted. So we're working on a couple missions like that. And then
Cool.
also
So
there's a
cool.
couple of space stations that need to be built. And so we've been talking with a couple of people who are working on building some space stations and they need robots to do it for them.
Okay. Are you guys just focused on the commercial side, or are you looking at helping Space Force and some of the DoD work that's happening?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of opportunities on the DoD side as well, and that is a focus of ours as well. So it's not all commercial, but
Mhm.
there's definitely the DoD side as well.
Yeah, very cool. So, what does that look like for your funding strategy? So, I know all the other founders in the audience, right? Like, listen up. This is, there's secrets here, lessons learned.
Yeah, yeah. I will say there's a couple of options. One is you can go the SBIR routes, where it's
Mhm.
basically grants that the government gives you either through NASA or the
Mhm.
DoD to do basically research. And so we've definitely applied for a good amount of those, and that'll be a great route for us to do some research to develop new technologies.
Mhm.
But for some of the technologies that are more mature and are just about ready to generate some revenue, we are talking to a couple of VCs to do some venture capital funding.
Mhm.
The difficult part there with both AI and mostly the aerospace side is you really need to get something into space before your customers are willing to use it because they want to know that it's already
Mm.
been used and it's basically, you've gotten all the kinks tested
Right.
out and it will work. So it's difficult to get VC funding because they want to
Right.
know that you have customers. Your customers aren't going to basically give you agreements or give you contracts until you have something into space.
Right.
So we've spent a good amount of time figuring out how to get around
The
that.
chicken or the egg. It actually
Yep.
sounds a lot like med tech or biotech. Oftentimes you have to have
Yeah.
that prototype before anybody will fund anything. And it's like, well,
Yep.
it takes a lot of effort to build that prototype. And so that's the plight of all manufacturing and hard tech founders, I
Hmm.
think. So which comes
Exactly.
first?
Yep.
Okay. Well, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to kind of chat through today?
My favorite ending is, what book are you currently reading?
Hmm.
Hmm. That is a good question. I just started a new one, and it is called Getting Things Done: The Art of Stress-Free Productivity by David Allen.
And so far, so good or helpful?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of tips for how to organize your workload, mostly if you have a whole bunch of emails coming in, how do you handle that without getting stressed out that you now
Mm,
need to take a break from the work you were focused on deeply to go answer an email that's urgent and at the same time get to everything else that you need to. So, yeah, I only just started, but so far it's a really great book.
amazing. Well, great. Well, if anybody has any questions for Aaron, please feel free to reach out. I will put links in the description to his LinkedIn and to Orbital Robotics. And we're excited to see all of the cool things that you guys do and build.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.